The first part of our Industrial Revolution PowerPoint here is going to be about the railroad industry and how it spurred on more industries. There are three essential questions that go along with this section. The first one being, what factors led to the construction of a network of railroads after the Civil War? The second question, how did railroad executives eliminate competition? And the third question is, how did railroad building encourage the growth of the economy? You must know the answer to all three of these questions by the end of this lecture. If you can't answer these questions, please go back and re-listen. The Civil War showed the importance of railroads. The railroads carried troops and supplies to the battlefields. They moved raw materials to the factories. And after the war, railroad companies began to build new lines all over the country. In the beginning, railroad lines were short because they only served local communities. Most of the lines didn't go more than 50 miles, in fact. Okay? Lines had to be connected then. And one of the problems with this is that the different lines used tracks of different gauges. A gauge is the width of a railroad tie. So because of this, the trains from one line could not run on the tracks of another. In general, the tracks of the North used different gauges from those in the South. In 1886, railroads in the South decided to adopt the Northern gauge, which made a huge difference. So Southern railroads stopped running so that they could change everything. They used crowbars and sledgehammers. Crews worked from morning until night. And when they were finished, they had 13,000 miles of track that had been changed. Once that track was standardized, American railroads formed a network of lines, just like you have a network, just like the networks is something that is connected. Okay, this helped shippers. Railroad companies arranged for freight cars on one line to use the tracks of another. Okay, new rails brought the country together because you could get from one place to another. By 1900, there were more miles of tracks in the United States than in Europe and Russia combined. There were also some new improvements as far as rail travel went. Each railroad car early on had its own brakes, and each one had a brake operator. So if different cars stopped at different times, you could have a terrible accident. George Westinghouse created a new invention called the air brake, and it allowed a train engineer to stop all of the railroad cars at once. This made a tremendous difference in safety. Long distance travel became much more popular with Pullman cars. These are the kinds of cars that you can sleep in. And riding by train became much more of a luxury. Okay. Time zones were also created during this time, and they were created because of train schedules. Time zones are a result of this railroad boom. At that time, many towns kept their own time, and when the sun was the highest over the town, it was noon. But 100 miles west, where the sun was still rising, the time was a few minutes before noon. So there were 27 local times in the state of Illinois, 23 in Indiana, and 38 in Wisconsin, depending on the size of the state. Now, to simplify train schedules, railroads established their own uniform time standard. So, in November of 1883, all railroad clocks were set to a standard time. And in 1918, Congress enacted the Standard Time Act, which created all of the time zones. Okay, anywho. Cornelius Vanderbilt. He was a very, very tough-minded businessman. He used sometimes ruthless tactics to force smaller owners to sell to him. Let's talk about him. This is his house. It's called the Biltmore Estate. Some of you may have seen this. It's a historic mansion, and it was at one time the largest private home in the United States. Now, I believe it's a museum and a hotel. Vanderbilt understood that transportation was important and the key to success in an industrial nation. That the United States needed to be able to move stuff and people quickly across the country. As I said, in 1860 there were 30,000 miles of railroad track. By 1900, there were over 300,000 miles. Okay, Vanderbilt bought up railroads after the Civil War. He was the son of a poor farmer, and he earned his first fortune in steamships, and then he began to buy up the railroad businesses. He used the ruthless tactic of forcing smaller owners to sell to him. If owners refused to sell, then Vanderbilt announced that passengers from other train lines would not be allowed to use his train, and so nobody wanted to use the smaller trains. Vanderbilt bought up all the lines between Chicago and Buffalo, and at the time of his death in 1877, his companies controlled 4,500 miles of track, and it linked New York to the Great Lakes. He was not exactly a popular guy, as you can see from this cartoon. He got a lot of people angry with him, and prompted this cartoon by a cartoonist named Thomas Nast. Railroad builders wanted to create thousands of miles of new track. In the years after completion of the first Continental Rail line in 1869, Americans built 3 more. Some of you may have heard of our very own James J. Hill, who lived on Summit Avenue. He built the Great Northern Railroad that wound from Duluth to Everett, Washington. The Great Northern was built without financial aid from Congress. Hill had to turn a profit from the very beginning, so he encouraged farmers and ranchers to move to the Northwest and settle near his railroad. And to get them to do that, he gave them seed and helped them to buy his equipment. So he basically bought people off there and gave them have them move their farms to the place where his railroads were. In the West, especially, there were too few people for railroads to make a profit. There was huge competition Rate wars broke out, and rival railroads tried to slash their prices, much like Target and Walmart do. Oftentimes, they were forced to grant secret rebates. Now, you all know what rebates are. If you go to Menards, every once in a while they'll have their 11% rebate sale. You save all of your receipts and send them in, and they'll send you a rebate check for 11% off. And that is exactly what a rebate is. It's a discount to the biggest customers, because the more you buy, the more you save. Okay. This practice forced many small railroads out of business. It also hurt small shippers such as farmers, who still had to pay the full price. Railroad owners soon realized that cutthroat competition was hurting even the large lines. They looked for ways that they could end the competition, so they came up with a method called pooling, P-O-O-L, pooling like a swimming pool. They decided that they would divide up a business area, and they would fix all their prices so that anybody who used the railroad would have to pay the exact same amount, and everybody would get some business. Rates were so high at certain times that farmers burned their crops instead of having to ship them to market, because they were so angry about this idea of pooling. The Populist Party, which was made up primarily of farmers, complained to Congress, and there weren't any laws that could stop it. So the railroad owners ended up bribing people to keep the laws from changing. So we had some problems during the railroad times. Certainly, building railroad lines created a lot of jobs. Steel workers turned millions of tons of iron into steel for tracks and engines. Lumberjacks cut down whole forests of trees to make railroad ties. Miners went into coal mines looking for fuel for these railroads. Railroad companies themselves employed lots and lots of workers to lay all the track and trestles that cross rivers. They had to carve tunnels through mountains, and also build the railroad station. The large railroads also pioneered new ways to manage business. Rail companies created special departments for shipping and accounting for servicing equipment. Management, expert managers were trained for each department and from the railroads and businesses. That's how that kind of middle management job came to be. Railroads opened every corner of the country to settlement and growth, and they brought people together, especially in the West. So new businesses like Denny's and Stuckey's, and no, I'm kidding, but businesses sprang up all over the place out to the West. With rail lines in place, the United States was very ready to become the greatest industrial nation the world had ever seen. Now, can you answer those questions? What factors led to the construction of the network of railroads after the Civil War? How did railroad executives eliminate competition? And how did railroad building encourage the growth of the American economy? Answer those questions and you're in good shape. Ta-ta for now.